Good Monday afternoon. Already we're at episode 9 of the book, Lightning at 200 Durham Street. I don't know whether you remember how the story started out or not, but the reason I've got the book cover up there is because the first chapter involved a lightning strike similar to the one you can see on the screen. And if I look back to the beginning of the end of that first chapter, and I'm going to read it, I think I've read it probably at the very beginning of the first show. Suddenly there was a brilliant flash of light. Remember, Joel's up in the attic in his home. He was momentarily blinded. The air was alive with electricity and strangeness. The roar in his ears was beyond. There were other crashes and other noises, and then total darkness. So he's been struck. And in this total darkness, just before he loses consciousness, he hears a strange man's voice shouting, "Joel!" That's how the book started. That was on a Friday night, June the 1st. And then, like some other irritating authors, I went back and started the story about 3 weeks before that. So then we had what unfolded in the following segments as they were broadcast, the project that they had to work on, the introduction of the bush, the discovery of the body in the bush, all the work that it took the coroner and the detective that was called in from London to try and figure out who the body was, and eventually, by looking up in the official records and finding out who owned the property, they found out that the body was that of a woman named Louise Carter. Louise wasn't from the area. She lived in Ottawa. So the Chief Petrovic and the detective, Gerald O'Neill, took the train to Ottawa and conducted interviews. And in the last session when we talked about this, they had finished their interviews. It was Friday night. They were back at their, I wouldn't say luxurious accommodation, but back at a hotel. They were having their supper and talking about their train ride on Saturday, the next day back to town. Well, while they were having their supper and talking about it, that's when Joel was struck by lightning. And so I'm moving on to the next chapter, which happened sometime later. So here's Joel. He's up in the attic. He's been unconscious. I slowly became aware. I wasn't certain where I was. Had I fallen asleep? I wasn't sure. I felt unusual. What had happened? Everything was very dark. Then I thought I'd heard a noise. I could hear someone. I must be waking up. But I didn't feel well. Why is my dad waking me up? Usually I get up by myself. I never had a problem getting up on time. I have an alarm clock. Usually I wake up before the alarm sounds anyway. Things don't seem right. What's wrong? Why do I feel so strange? My head is really bothering me. Everything seems very confusing. I'd heard about strokes. My Aunt Addie had a stroke, and she died a day later. But I'm pretty healthy for 17. I couldn't have had a stroke. Aside from the confusion in my mind, I have a very severe pain in my lower right leg. My left leg was resting against one of the steel legs on the small cot that I sleep on in the attic. I can hear my dad's voice. It seems muted. It doesn't make any sense. Why is my dad up in the attic? I can't see very well. Is it morning? It's dark. Why is he waking me up? Now I can hear my mom coming up the stairs. It sounds like she's crying. Something must have happened. Nothing seems to fit together. It's all so confusing. Someone must have put something cold on my head. I can hear my parents' voices. Someone's trying to sit me up. Why won't they just let me sleep? I'll feel better when I wake up. I can see a little better now. There is no daylight, but there is a lantern sitting in my attic room. Now I can see my dad. I can see him clearly. My mom's here too. They're talking to me. I have to concentrate. I'm not sure what they're saying to me. My head hurts and the pain in my leg is severe. Can you hear me? My dad asked. Nod your head if you can hear me. I nodded my head slowly. My eyes are working a little better now, and so are my ears. Can you talk? My dad asked. Just answer with a simple yes. I licked my lips, flexed my cheeks, and got my tongue in the right place and said, yes, I can hear you. What day is it? My dad asked. I frowned, trying to remember. Then my mother began to cry. It's Friday, my dad said. Why is it so dark in here? I asked. What's wrong with the lights? It's night, my dad said. Do you remember anything about Friday? So then Joel talked to him about what little he could remember about Friday. And then his dad says, there was a very bad storm earlier in the evening. There was quite a bit of damage in town. Most of the damage was from the wind. Tree limbs have come down, fences have been knocked over, some trees have blown over as well. The winds were extremely strong. Thank heavens it wasn't a full tornado, said his mom. When my mom was growing up and their farm was in the path of a tornado, they lost their barn and their farmhouse and quite a bit of livestock. But no one in the family was injured. We hid in the root cellar. A tornado was my mother's greatest fear. Mom sighed and said, tonight we lost the big maple at the end of the garden. The wind didn't get it, but the lightning did. Fortunately, the tree fell and missed our home and the neighbor's house as well. There was an awful lot of severe lightning, said my dad. 4 fires broke out in town during the storm. Fortunately, only 2 of them were in homes, and they were quickly put out by the fire department. Other than that, a small shed and garage burned to the ground. The lightning was the worst anyone around here can remember. The lightning blast that took our maple tree down also did minor damage to the house next door. It struck so close to us that I'll have to take a good look in the daylight to see whether or not our house sustained any damage. Mrs. Jensen across the street said it looked like a tremendous fork of lightning hit our house. But it must have been the tree in the side yard that it hit. I'm not sure. I was starting to feel a little better, but my legs still hurt and my head still felt peculiar. I didn't seem to be able to see. I did seem to be able to see okay now, and my hearing was almost back to normal, but I still felt strange. Do I look okay? I asked my dad. Look in my eyes. Oh, you look okay, Joel, my dad said, and with a reassuring smile he said, you seem a little woozy though, not quite your normal self. My mind was clearing. I realized I was lying on the floor in my attic bedroom. Are you well enough to stand up now? My dad asked. I think so, I replied, but my leg, it hurts an awful lot. Let me look at your leg before you stand up, my mother said. Where does it hurt? I lifted my pant leg and pointed at a place above my calf. See that weird spot just above my ankle? It's very painful. My dad helped me get up enough to sit on the edge of the bed, and from that position, my mom was able to get a better look at the angry-looking spot on my lower leg. Looks like a very bad burn, she said. How could I get a bad burn? There's no fire here, I said. Look at the metal support of the leg of the bed, my dad said. There are fresh signs of paint starting to bubble. And there's also some minor discoloration. Then my dad thought for a moment and said, maybe I got hit by lightning, Joel. I think you're lucky. I think the lightning went right through your ankle to the metal support and then traveled along the bed frame until it found another conductor. Well, now that you mention it, it does feel like a burn, I said. I need to put something on that burn right away, my mother said. And she went to hunt for something. So Joel got struck by lightning. I wonder if there was any permanent damage. They had lots to talk about. They went downstairs. It wasn't that late at night, 8:30 maybe. They got a pie out of the fridge. And as they sat there eating their pie, his dad said, let's hit the sack and hope for sweet dreams. I sure hope my dreams would be sweet. But I just couldn't get that voice that hollered at me just before I became unconscious. So everyone goes to bed. Joel says, I love my room in the attic. And I was getting tired of sharing a bedroom with my brother Ralph, who was 5 years younger than me. He was always bugging me. So he got his room in the attic. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, he was nervous up there by himself. It was his imagination kind of running wild. He was still thinking back. I had heard that voice, and I'd recognize it if I heard it again. I was just hoping I wasn't going to hear that voice again. I didn't like bats in the attic or bats in my belfry. But you know you don't always get what you want. Sometimes your mind just won't rest, especially if there's a mystery involved, something you're trying to figure out. So he's up in his bedroom in the attic with his flashlight. He swings it around the attic, looking around to make sure he's by himself, even though he knows he is. And he did feel afraid. I just need to calm down, he was thinking. And once I calm down, I'll get tired, I'll go to sleep, and I'll be fine. But he didn't turn the flashlight off right away. Instead, he picked up his favorite book. It was the Boys' Own Annual. It came from England. He'd received a bound copy of the 1927, that was last year, 1927 Boys' Own papers for this past Christmas. He received it for Christmas, rather. That's where they bind the 52 papers, weekly papers. They bound them together and called it the annual. And it's Joel's prized possession. So he's looking at it and he's thinking, I'll stay away from the adventure stories. Instead, there's probably lots of other information to keep my mind occupied. And he started reading an essay on telescopes by a famous British astronomer. He kept the language simple and it was interesting, and he was just starting to relax. And then he didn't know whether he felt something or not. He stopped reading and he took his flashlight and he pointed it around the room. But he didn't see anything right away. But he couldn't get rid of the feeling. The feeling was so strong that the hairs on the back of his neck and arms stood up. He knew that it was a response to a perceived fear, but the rational thought wasn't comforting. What did he have to fear here? He was in his own secure space. And he had his flashlight. And they checked the house before they went to bed. Anyway, that was when he heard his name. Joel. It was a man's voice. He didn't know what to say. He didn't want to say anything. He didn't want to start talking to people who weren't there. And he didn't want to disturb his parents and brother and sister who were sleeping on the floor below. He heard the voice again. It wasn't very loud, but he could plainly hear it. Joel. So with great trepidation he whispered, "Yes." "I thought so," said the voice. Well, now he didn't know what to do. Why am I hearing a voice? He thought. And he was sure that's what he thought. He didn't say it out loud. "Because I'm speaking to you," the entity said. "Can anybody else hear your voice? Can my parents or the rest of the family hear you?" "I don't think so," said the voice. "Don't be frightened. I'm as surprised as you are. I really didn't expect to communicate again with anyone who was alive." That didn't make Joel feel any less apprehensive. "Are you a ghost? Do you try to scare people?" "I have tried," the voice responded, "but they can't hear me." "Please call me Walter." My full name is Walter Yost. "If I whisper, can you hear me?" Joel asked. Not really. I can hear you when you think about me," Walter said. "You don't have to speak out loud. Just imagine speaking to me in your mind." Am I crazy? Why is this happening, I thought. "I'm puzzled too," said Walter, who could sense his thoughts. "But I think I know the answer," Walter said. "Please tell me." "You were struck by lightning." I didn't know what to say. I was terrified. I was dumbfounded. Was I still rational? Walter spoke again. since my death, I haven't heard from any other living person. But I've had a limited contact with others like myself. Are you a ghost? Maybe. It depends what a ghost is, Walter said. I know you and the rest of your family have never seen me. If you shine your flashlight around, you won't see me. I think the only reason you and I are communicating is that we're both in the attic and that tremendous lightning bolt shook everything up. The lightning took out the big tree in the yard and messed up everything, relying on electrical signals in the immediate area, including your mind. You have that burn on your leg as a reminder. But I'm certain your mind was affected too. I have no rational explanation as to how we can communicate. For all intents and purposes, in your world, I do not exist. Then Walter continued. I didn't die peacefully. I died in a terrible accident. Before that, I went through a situation that was very unfair and frustrating. It left me in a permanent state of anger. I was so angry as I lay there dying that I just simply refused to stop existing. Then Walter tells the story of his life. Of course, you have to buy the book to see that story. And he had this terrible accident, which essentially had him falling on he worked for a lumber company, and he fell on the big blade down below. I don't even want to think about it. Anyway, they talked on after Walter told his story. They talked on some more. And they're trying to sort this out, especially Joel, because he hasn't been prone to hearing voices before. Joel said to him, are you friendly? Are you evil? Can you hurt me? I could ask you the same question, Walter said. I'm pretty certain we both would provide the same answers. But it doesn't matter because I don't really exist. So I don't know how I could possibly hurt you. You can communicate with me and I can communicate with you. But otherwise, your life just goes on as it is. Well, and then Walter thought, I really only know one other person like you, and she seems pretty normal. She wasn't struck by lightning, and she hasn't gone mad. She lives an ordinary life. I don't know how she came by her ability, but I do know you obtained yours when you were struck by lightning. What happens if I tell other people about you, Walter? Joel asked. Nothing happens to me, Walter said, but I'm not sure what would happen to you. I mean, I guess you could go into show business or join the circus, but I don't think you're that kind of person. Most likely what would happen is they'd lock you up in an insane asylum. They talked a little more, but that was it. Now that part of the story is important because Joel's ability to do some things, to solve mysteries with the aid of essences, is important in the series of books. So I guess what's happening now is as terrible as he's talking to Walter, as Joel's talking to Walter, probably in Ottawa. Chief Petrovic and Detective O'Neill are snoozing away in their beds. I wonder what happens on Saturday, the next day. I guess you won't find out till next time. Now, there's one other thing I wanted to talk about. At the end of the last program, I mentioned to you, I don't know whether you had noticed, noticed this name or not. I say, can you find out anything about Lair's relic? Well, if you did, good for you. If you didn't, here's a hint. Use a mirror. Thank you for listening.